What's up everyone, welcome back to another GameMaker Studio video. This is not a tutorial, this is going to be 5 tips from me to you on how to be better at GameMaker. Alright, so tip number 1, use scripts. Always use scripts. If you don't have a single script in your game, you're doing something wrong. Scripts are extremely powerful and useful for making games. If you are, having trouble, or you're just copying and pasting a bunch of code that's the same over and over again, most likely you want to use a script. Or if you want to make a, a big block of code that you're going to be using elsewhere, use a script. This will make things more modular and save you a lot more time in the long run when making games. So, for example, here I have Suits 2 open, and we have some scripts I have here open. So, I want to make a database of items. Well, use a script. I can use a script and have every single item in here, and make them just all in here, and they all follow. And I can use this script to call by inputting certain arguments into here and call for certain information I want from that object. And here's like adding this object to my inventory. All the code is here, and all I do is just type in one line of code and put an argument in there. It's really simple, and even for things that you might just be like, well, it's not that complicated or something. Trust me, you're still going to want this. For example, I made this recently, get number of suits. I needed some way to count how many suits I own, because they don't work the same way as stackable items. Since they don't stack, I need to figure out how I can do it. So I made a script, and I said, hey, it's a very simple script. It's only 12 lines of code, but it's enough for me to be like, yeah, I don't want to be putting this code repeat all over again in my code, or else it gets messy. So use scripts. Tip number 2, when you're making a script, make sure that you don't just say argument 0. Make sure you make a variable first and set that equal to your arguments. This helps just make things a lot easier when you're reading your code, so that you don't just get lost, like, oh, what does this number, what does argument 0 even do? I don't remember. And it doesn't hurt to do it. Now, I can't say I'm like a saint or anything at this, because I do this all the time. For example, here's a script I have here to get the amount that's in a stack of items. I just have argument 0 right here. I don't even have it in a variable. Same thing with this code here, where it's adding the item to use. This has a lot of the times, like you can see it everywhere here, just all these argument 0 just all around my code. This would have been better if I just said var whatever I want to name it, to make sure this is the item I want to put in my inventory. So use variables. Sometimes you're going to be like me and then just not do it, and that's still fine. But when you have a lot of code like this and you have multiple, you really want to do this just to keep track of all the data that's going in here and making sure you're putting things in the right place. Tip number 3, use regions. Now, a lot of people always tell you comment on your code, and while I agree that that's a good practice and you should do it, I never do it. I rarely do it. But however, what I do a lot is use regions, because it is one of the best things they've added into GameMaker that they needed, because you can get code that gets really long and repetitive. For example, I have here my step. I can enclose this all in this one region called gamepad controls. This is for keyboard and controller support. Now if I can open it up, and you'll see now, oh, here's all the stuff. And I can look here, I'm like, oh, well, here's when you press E, or check to see if you pressed the shoulder buttons on the controller, or space. And it's like, but what does that do? Now you can put a comment, and I used to do this, I just put a comment, oh, inside here, like this is for confirming. But no, now you can use a region to enclose all that code. And watch this, you see I open it and there's even more regions inside. It's super well organized. And once you open this region, then you have a bunch of code, and that's why you need to do it, because otherwise this is going to get crazy. I have 1,055 lines of code in here, and it gets messy, and you're gonna your brain's gonna be everywhere. You're gonna be everywhere when you have all this code just unorganized, and that's why you should use these regions more than commenting on your code. Usually, if you're working on this by yourself, there's no need to comment on code, except there is still, I guess, because otherwise you're gonna be confused when you go back to some code that you haven't touched in like forever and you have to reread it. That happens to me all the time. But sometimes you just don't have the time. But you have the time. I don't have the time much to like just kind of comment on everything. I just go with the flow, but I always do regions. They are very useful. Tip number 4 is not one that is going to be improving your coding skills, but it's something that I should do more often, but I do it whenever I get a scare. So back up your game. And you might be like, how do I even do that? I mean, you could always save it as a separate thing. The best way to back up your game is by going to File, Export Project. This will make your project into a single, it's called a YYZ export, but it's like an executable in a sense. Once you run it, it'll just open up the project, make a new project pretty much. And so I'm going to do this right now. It's been a while since I backed up. I'm going to save. It's going to overwrite it. Yeah, we want that. Unless you want to do multiple backups, for different previous stuff, you can do that. And it'll take a while. You'll say saving. It pretty much compresses all of your game stuff into this one nice package. So it makes it really nice to if you lose all your data, which has happened to me before with our mobile game Super Pocket Drillionaire, which is on Google Play right now. We lost all of the data that we were working on, or at least something happened where the project file was corrupted. I still had a bunch of data, but I had to pretty much first I started off building from scratch. It was the worst thing ever. I was suppressed with the fact that I had to rebuild pretty much the entire game. Even though we were not super far into completing the game, we had quite a bit done. However, there was a way I managed to actually get back all my code, and it took a while before actually getting it working. So it was just a project file that was actually just broken, and it happened because my power went out as I created an object. So make sure you're very careful if it's raining, if it's thundering, your power goes out. Alright guys, for my final tip for this video, and that's tip number 5, use the manual. Always read the manual. Understand how to read this. Just go in. If you need to figure out, if you're new to GameMaker, you might want to start off watching some tutorials first, because sometimes you'll look at this and you're like I did, and I'd be like, well, I don't really quite understand what this means, but you watch a tutorial, you might still not completely understand the concepts of certain functions. However, if you just read through this, don't read a book or anything going through every single thing. Just read what you need to know. I want to do something with cameras. How do I properly set up a camera? Well, GameMaker actually always tells you actually how to set up cameras, and they always give you examples in these. And just read them carefully, and read them probably read through through a thing multiple times, because sometimes it just doesn't click until you read it for a while. Understand all this all this stuff. It's good. What I don't like seeing is people going straight to Reddit on the subreddit and saying, I need help, here's my code, and then not explaining anything. Because the thing is, everybody always codes differently. And it's hard to help someone just by, here's my code for this. Why is this not working? And even though there's always going to be more to your code. I think I've only asked help from Reddit once, and I don't remember if it was a question of my code not working. I'm pretty sure it was more of something like GameMaker's not working. It's not letting me do something. And so Oh yes, I remember now. It was a weird thing that GameMaker was doing. GameMaker Studio 2 was doing. I think it was when I was working in Game 19. I couldn't find any answer, and I eventually messaged the devs, support for Yo-Yo Games, and they came back to me saying, well, it's working the way it's supposed to work. It's just that you're not doing something right. You're not doing something right. Eventually I looked more into it, and I see that, yeah, I was in the wrong, but they're kind of also in the wrong, because they kind of, in a sense, made a way that was so much easier to do something. And plus, if you need real help on something, send it to GameMaker support, because they'll require you that you actually send them the whole project. So if you have like a serious problem and it's like something's not working, they'll help. But don't use Reddit. A lot of times, you know, I never get replies, or if I do, it's usually not useful. Google's also good, because if you just Google, you probably, if you're having a problem, most likely someone else had a problem too, and you just Google it. But at some point, when you get to my point, you don't really need to use. I don't use any of those stuff. I just look at the